Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak at your annual International Forum on Higher Education. Today, I'd like to address the idea of reforming and reorienting higher education to address a more sustainable future. To do this, I've put together a few slides, and let me just bring them up. Okay. Now, at the beginning, let me point out, I'm very aware of the exciting work that you're doing there in China around education for sustainable development. I've been coming to China on and off since 1987, but in the last 10 or 15 years, I've been working very closely with the folks in Beijing, with the Asia Pacific Institute on Education for Sustainable Development. I love the interesting conceptual links that is going on in China. The idea of perhaps altering the concept of sustainable development slightly to make it more cohesive within a Chinese context, and sort of bringing forward the idea of an ecological civilization. Very, very insightful. However, let's begin with the idea of what are the threats to a more sustainable future. And if we look at the work of the World Economic Forum, they every year put forward what they see as the global risk landscape. And if we look at the one for 2020, then we see the risks that are identified. We see the complexity. We see the first of all, identified as social risks, environmental risks, economic risks. They're put out in different proportions as to what they perceive as the impact. Very, very noticeable that infectious diseases does not rank as high as climate action or climate failure, right, to act, and also is not as high as social instability. So, but the real thing that stands out is the interconnectedness, the webs that are going on behind the scene. So we see the complexity and the interrelationship between social, environmental, and economic issues. So what is the context, and what do we need to address that? And one of the things I think that really stands out is the difference between this kind of an image and the image of what the world nations have come up with in how to address it. You can see the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 agenda, seem, even in the graphics, seem to stand alone. And I think this is a huge difference that we in higher education will really struggle with, because it means that to deal with them, we have to deal with them in an interdisciplinary manner. Right? We can't just deal with water without dealing with the social impact, the environmental impact, the different sciences that will be involved in trying to deal with it. So this, not only is there the singular approach, but what I think we need to do is to really consider phenomena-based learning within higher education as we bring the different disciplines together. And that, of course, will not be easy. But the importance of it is huge. A disproportionate impact from university graduates on the future of the planet. Globally, only a small percentage of people graduate from universities, yet they will become not only the political leaders, but the financial leaders. They will be the head of civil service. They will be the head of the non-government organizations. They'll be the philosophical leaders. Right? They'll be the poets, the painters, the writers, and so on. And so they will be shaping society. So there is a wonderful opportunity for those of us in higher education to try and address this. But with that opportunity, if we have a chance of a number of years uh, working with our future leaders, we also have a tremendous responsibility to this. Now, we've had a long history, of course, of working with higher education, being engaged and involved in sustainable development. Now, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, this is our third implementation plan. But higher education leaders were working even behind the scenes in the late 1980s as we were pulling together not only the concept of sustainable development, but working on the first implementation plan called Agenda 21. Right? We were also involved with the Millennium Development Goals that followed Agenda 21, which only ran from 1992 to 2000. From 2000 to 2015, we had the Millennium Development Goals, and now from 2015 to 2030, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, education in general, we have our own goal. And in it, we have higher education identified as target 4.3, where we are called upon to provide equal, equitable access, affordable, and quality tertiary education. Now, we have many discussions, of course, about what is a quality education. But I would put forward the concept that if we did not address sustainable development, we would not have quality. Now, target 4.7, though, is more what we want to talk about today, and that is everyone. By 2030, all learners will have the knowledge and skills to address sustainable development, so on. And usually we wrap this up in calling education for sustainable development. But what does this really mean? And over the years, traditionally, we've worked on it on the four aspects. The first being access and retention in a quality education. Without education, there will be no development, right? But there is the second aspect is that it's often our most educated countries that are creating some of the greatest sustainability threats, right? So the second part then is important, the reorienting of our existing education and training systems to address sustainability. Now, how do we go about doing that? And I'll say a bit more about now in a few moments. The third aspect is building public awareness and understanding. We have to have both a knowledgeable consumer and a knowledgeable producer. We have to have people who will understand enlightened political legislation when it comes forward and be willing to take part. And the fourth thing is where we do know how to do things more sustainably, how can we train our workforces and so on, and our civil servants to it. So overall, UNESCO, which is the UN agency that is responsible for sustainable development and education for sustainable development, rather, not overall, but for the education, public awareness, and training component, they look at ESD in this manner as a holistic learning approach. I like to think of it as a purpose of education itself, an approach that empowers learners to make informed decisions, to take reasonable action based on that, right? That has integrity, is based in values and ethics and so on, looking for a just society, and not just for the present, but for future generations. Now, this, not only do we have target or Sustainable Development Goal 4, but we also have the UN General Assembly on 3 occasions now, in 2017, again in 2019, and again just a matter of weeks ago, reaffirming that education for sustainable development, that target 4.7, is not only a key integral part of goal 4, but it is the key. It is the key for implementing all of the sustainable development goals. Now, in Agenda 2030, higher education is specifically mentioned in 9 of the goals. Right? Not only is it a sort of a background for implementing all sustainable development goals, but it's specifically called upon with roles. Now, this is not a one-way street, however. No. Yes, we call upon higher education to bring forward the research, to bring forth the knowledge, the shaping of future leaders, and so on. But in return, the sustainable quest for a sustainable future, this also reinvigorates, repurposes. It brings new research opportunity. It brings relevance to higher education itself. So this is kind of a circular part. Now, UNESCO has found that this mission of providing the education, public awareness, and training globally for a more sustainable future is so important that the nations of the world agreed that we would have a UN decade of education for sustainable development that ran from 2005 to 2014. And that was followed by a global action program to build upon the decade. And it ran from 2015 to 2019. And now, as I say, we're into our 3rd action plan, and it runs from 2020 to 2030. Now, there are 5 priority actions in it, and the first one being advancing policy. Yes, we can't really fund and move forward cohesively without some kind of organizing policy, right? But the second one is transforming learning environments, and this is extremely important for higher education, and I'll come back to this. The third is building the capacity of educators, the kinds of things that we're doing in this conference to address it, think about it, and figure out how we are going to respond. The fourth is empowering and enabling youth who will inhabit this earth as we move on. And fifthly, accelerating action at the local level. How do we transform from the global goals to local action? Now, within this, and I know you can't really read or see this, but the graphic talks about the cognitive learning, the behavioral changes. It talks about the social-emotional aspects of it. Yes, we do need the social sciences if we are actually going to address what the natural sciences and physical sciences bring forward as understanding of the problem. How do we move forward? And so, of course, it is so very important that we have the social sciences engaged, but it also shows how we radiate out through all of the sustainable development goals. One of the things that we need to understand in bringing about this transformation will be the unique roles in higher education of deans and heads of academic units to try and transform policy to bring this to change the policy into reality, to bring forward this policy into actual programs and everyday practice. Now, changing pedagogically, it said transforming learning environments. And the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, has come forward with a learning compass that talks about knowledge, and it includes values and skills for acting. And this aligns, that's the one on the left, but the learning compass also aligns with the stages of transformation that comes from UNESCO. UNESCO also says how important it is for the acquisition of knowledge and information right? To be able to understand the reality and to discern this from the fake news, the social media influence that is out there, because there is a tendency for people to want to follow what and identify with what they would like to believe, right? So that is, yes, the knowledge and acquisition is important. And then, as I say, there is that critical analysis. How do we sort out what is real, what is not? What is important? How do we understand who is delivering the message, right? How do we understand the analysis of who will be the new winners in change, and what will those who were currently winning but may tend to lose, what will they do? So there's all of that critical analysis. Yes, it's important. It is important not only to know, but to experience and want to become engaged. That is a huge step. But fourthly, and something we don't know that much about, but how do we build the personal engagement? How do we personalize this? How do we build compassion with what it is that we want to do, so that we end up with a knowledgeable, compassionate person who will go down that road of empowerment and act? Now, let me close by putting out perhaps a framework to help us work on. The United Nations showed how a phenomena such as COVID is impacted by all of the Sustainable Development Goals, right? They all play a role in dealing with this. And I think this is an important idea. We are faced with so many of these risks. If we go back to that first slide and you consider in there what the World Economic Council identified, that web of different risks, we need to have some sort of academic framework in which we can deal with different ones, bring in different disciplines and faculties and so on, working collaboratively. And I suggest that for now, the Sustainable Development Goals themselves become that kind of a framework. So whether you're working with climate change, biodiversity loss, the impact of migration, economic justice, and so on, that we think of the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework. Now, whether it is taking the current goals or saying, how do we localize them? What would be the local goals as we move forward to address the issue? Or whether we say, okay, what goals are missing? You know, what have nations not been able to agree upon that are real and should be within that 17? These SDGs give us a framework for addressing. And whether it could be in terms of looking at the issues from the framework of prevention. What steps do we have to do to prevent this from actually happening? Or with mitigation, how do we reduce the impact? Or from adaptation, you know, this is going to happen. What do we have to do now to address this? So let me build on this wonderful concept from Daniela Tilbury, that it's time for higher education to shift from being mirrors of society to becoming lighthouses of a sustainable future. You know, the Sustainable Development Goals are here now, but they are simply the third implementation plan. In about 4 years, we'll already be thinking about 2030 to 2045 or 2030 to 2050. And as we prepare for that, I urge higher education to be thinking about what are the conceptual frameworks that we need to even modify sustainable development. The concept itself has so many weaknesses. You know, it is so human-centric. it does not address all forms of life here on the planet, so on. So change is needed, and I can't think of a better place to do that than within higher education. So thank you very, very much for this opportunity to be with you, to virtually. I really wish I was there in person to enjoy the discussions that we would have around tea. Thank you very much.